should see what I've been able to stop.
Yeah, that's right. You've been able to stop some.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to historic Auburn Hall. All right, that was great. I didn't even need a gavel. We are here for a workshop on a proposed staff work plan, and many of you are just seeing the staff. Staff have obviously seen this before. The council's seeing it for the first time tonight, and rather than bore you with a lengthy opening comments, I'm going to defer to Peter and Craig to start the workshop, and we'll go from there.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm going to explain a little bit about how the workshop is going to work, but the first thing to say is thanks for inviting me back to work with you all. I was last in this room April 10th. It was Peter's first day on the job. We had a council workshop. And since then, I've been invited back to work with all the department heads. We had a 3-hour workshop this morning, and I even met with the department heads a week or two ago setting up for this. There's been a lot of work among these folks leading up to the draft work plan that's presented for you this evening. Peter's going to explain a little bit of the context of this draft work plan. I don't want to get into that. I am here to serve you in terms of the process. I'm going to manage this evening's meeting, and I'm going to take some high-level notes of conclusions that you all reach. We're going to have these introductory comments to start with, and then pretty quick in the meeting here, we're going to take a break for dinner. Pizza served in the other room. We've allowed ourselves a half hour for that, and then a generous amount of time to go through this work plan. We want to make sure that you understand it and feel good about it at a high level. That is what I would say is our goal for this evening. We'll give each of you a chance for closing comments and adjourn by 8:30. Like last time, I am proposing some ground rules, just some simple things to keep in mind as we have our workshop tonight. A forward focus. This is a work plan for the future, regardless of what's happened in the past or what's worked or not worked in the past. Tonight is our opportunity to think, well, how should it be over the next year? This is a discussion among councilors, the mayor, and the city manager. We have a number of department heads right around the table, and they may be called on to speak. I know that the city manager, in some cases, will ask them to explain particular parts of the work plan, but otherwise, I'm seeing we don't seem to have any members of the public here. This is primarily councilors, the mayor, and the city manager. I'm asking that you let me manage the discussion a little bit so we can make sure that everybody gets a chance who wants to. When you do a work plan like this, there can be a tendency to get into the weeds, if you will, get into the details. We are asking you to stay on the high ground and trust the city staff to work out the details. Themes and conclusions now. I'm going to type some stuff right on the screen. You'll also have them later. And I'm neutral, and if you ask for how other municipalities handle this or that, I'll try to bring what I know of best practices, but my main job tonight is just to facilitate your discussion. Okay, that's just a quick and dirty overview of how the thing is going to work. Let's turn to Peter for some context here.
Craig, thank you very much. Because we are too late. If you turn yours off. Gotcha. So, thank you, everybody. I feel like I need to be quiet here. I want to thank the mayor and the council for being here, taking the time to participate in this. I told the department heads this morning when we were going through this process, when I came through the interview process, one of the things that we talked about was the importance of putting together a work plan. And I recognize that we have an election coming up in November, and there will be some changes made, but I felt like it was a commitment that I had made to you to put this plan together, and I think it's going to be a good guideline for me and for Denise and Jody in the city manager's office, and for the department directors as well. We will review whatever comes out of this plan next November, or I should say when the next council and mayor are seated, to reaffirm what is in the plan, and we will move forward as a city government. I appreciate the efforts that the department heads have made in putting together the information for you tonight. Because of Craig's schedule, it was an interesting process. We had our meeting earlier today from 9 to 12, and then Craig was here through the afternoon putting the finishing touches on this with Denise. And Denise has done a great job, fantastic job in pulling the information together from the department directors and really helping to frame this discussion that we're having tonight. There are, as I see this, this is like 4 cornerstones in terms of what we're trying to do as a community. When you look at the front page of this, you will see that you have, if I can, you have these on the very front cover. You have strengthening our community, growing our economy, leading in public service, and building a sustainable community. Those are the cornerstones in terms of this work plan and what we're going to try and do. And as part of this, you will see there are common themes that we have established. Thank you, Craig. And then there are also initiatives that I think are based on the FY18 budget that was approved by the council, that the department directors and staff worked on, and this is incorporated into this work plan as well as some long-term priorities as well. So what you have here is a reflection of the FY18 work plan and also some long-term priorities in terms of where we're heading as a city. And what we'd like to have tonight is a discussion with you to talk about these different concepts that we have in this work plan and to make sure that we're headed in a direction that you are comfortable with and that you support. And I look forward to that discussion. I think we all do. And I will be asking department directors to participate as we go along at different times. The lighting here is not great. I wonder if we could hit the lights here to try and... You've got the information in front of you, but for the public,
How many times have
it would be good if we could do something to make it clearer.
Yes.
The overall goal is to work together to increase property values and investment in the city of Auburn. That's what we're striving to do. My personal goal is to, and I think the department heads share this, and I believe you do as well, to make the city of Auburn one of the best small cities in the nation. I have been very impressed with the staff that we have here as a city at every level throughout the organization. The things that are being done, I think, are setting a great example for other communities in the state of Maine, and I dare say outside the state of Maine. We just had an accreditation review of the Public Services Department by 4 accreditors that came in, and I was extremely impressed with what was done with that process. Dan Goyette and his team deserve a lot of credit for that. You can go around the city and look at what we're doing as a city, and there are a lot of things that we can feel very good about. So we have these 4 cornerstones: strengthening our community, growing our economy, building a sustainable city, and leading in public service, with the overall goal of working together to increase property values and investment in the city of Auburn. In terms of long-term goals, thank you, Craig. You'll see that for each of these cornerstones, there are themes. For strengthening our community, we want a vibrant, connected, and engaged neighborhood active in this city. We want engaged neighborhoods. We want to be able to work with the neighborhoods. So this is a city of neighborhoods. We want caring and compassionate services, healthy, safe, and accessible city with amazing arts, culture, and recreation experiences. Under growing our economy, we are looking and talking about strategic collaborative partnerships, diverse employment opportunities, local, regional, global innovation, robust business development. And then the other cornerstones, building a sustainable city, we're talking about a robust infrastructure. We want responsible growth. We want beautiful places and spaces. We want a connected community. We want strong and healthy environment. And on leading in public service, we want open, accountable, and responsive government, proactive financial management, collaborative, engaged leadership, and excellent service delivery. And beneath these themes, we have the initiatives that come from the council, that come from the mayor, the FY18 budget that was approved with some long-term goals in terms of where we want to go as a city. As an example, if you want to go on, you can see under, can you go up just a little bit? Thank you. So for this first cornerstone, which is strengthening our community, we have arts, culture, history, community recreation, special events, neighborhoods, opioid crisis, PAL, public safety, responsiveness, facilities, equipment, schools, and sports tourism. Those are all related to strengthening this community so that we have a strong community. Then under growing our economy, we have agricultural investment, branding and marketing, Auburn, development opportunities, the new Auburn development that is taking place, partnerships and volunteerism, immigrant and new Mainer contributions, and the issue of workforce development. If you go down the page to the other cornerstones, building a sustainable city, we have the relicensing process with the Barker Mill Dam, Lewiston Falls, we have the downtown beautification, Riverwalk restoration, infrastructure and equipment, and property inventory for downtown adjacent neighborhoods. Then leading in public service, we have the capital improvement plan, which we all know is integral to what we're doing as a city, city council communications, customer service communications, IT, technology, and GIS, and then professional employee development and certifications. These are the cornerstones for this work plan, for the goals that we are recommending be established as part of this work plan. And what we'd like to do is we'd like to, over the next hour and a half, couple hours, have a discussion with you as we go through this to get your thoughts, your comments on what you think of this approach. It's a reflection of the FY18 work plan. It's also a reflection of where we'd like to be as a city based on the budget for FY18 and also based on some long-term priorities that we've all heard discussed over the last few months and prior to that. At this point, I'd like to stop and see if there are any questions that anyone has before we get started. I don't know if the pizza is here yet. Jody, do you know if that is? If not, we can continue forward. And
Ahead of schedule.
we are ahead of schedule now. Are there any questions at this point about anything that has been mentioned? Comments? Yes.
Just real quick, are we going to be able to make comments as far as what's on page 1 to page 2, or any kind of,
Sure.
suggestions or whatever?
Yes. Okay. Absolutely.
Did I hear a call for comments there, Mr. Manager?
Go ahead. Yes.
The one thing that stood out, at least on this initial aspect of this Venn diagram, which I really appreciate, is building a sustainable city, and I would like to say that that's predicated on the fact that we're going to remain one city in the city of Auburn. And I appreciate that that's something that must be in the back of your mind, or something that you think about at least a little bit each week. And you know, I believe in that, and we have no choice but to go forward with that presumption, is that that's the way it's going to go. So I think that that takes a lot of courage in your shoes to step into this position with this merger vote coming up on November 7th. And I hope that we can all, besides me mentioning it right now, go forward with the assumption that we're going to be working as the city of Auburn going forward on this. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that.
My thoughts on that are that that vote hasn't taken place. I don't know what the final outcome on that vote is going to be. In the meantime, we have a city to run and to oversee, and that's what we're going to do to the best of our abilities. Other comments anyone has? Mayor, councilors?
Yes, Mr. Manager. One of the things that we're hearing in the merger discussion, there's been a lot of it, is all the improvements that would be made by merging and so on and so forth. And I have been consistently making the point in those discussions that you know, and the theme of the discussion has been, well, you know, where people that don't want to merge are groundhogs from Mayberry RFD, meaning that we just want to, literally, it really insults me that these statements are being made by community leaders. But one of the points that I make in these discussions is that Auburn is not standing still. Auburn has look at the things that we have done, and it takes people to make a great city go. We have hired, I don't want to embarrass you, but I think probably the cream of the crop in terms of city management in Maine, city management talent in Peter Creighton. We have hired an extremely strong assistant and city manager. We have put in place an extremely aggressive and strong business development manager to market the city and sell the city. And we have an extremely strong core of managers in each department that are improving on a month-to-month basis, improving the services and delivery that we're making. So I don't call that being groundhogs, doing the same thing day after day and accepting of the status quo. So the job of our opposition is not to determine, you know, and come back with 15 different things that we're going to do to improve the city. That's being done now by the council, and it's being done by staff as it should be. So anyways, I just wanted to make that point. There's the expectations of the voters that will go to and who knows how they're going to vote, we don't know. But the expectations are high that Auburn will remain a separate entity and based upon strong tradition, and will be a great small city. I loved your goal that we would have one of the smallest, one of the strongest small cities in the state. We're not a small city by any means. So anyways, I just wanted to point that out, and I think that voters are buying into that, and from all the polling that we have been doing. So I think this is a great way to kind of pause and say, where are we going as over the next few months, next few years. So I just wanted to make that point.
Council Lee.
The only groundhog that gives me any concern right now is the one that's digging a hole underneath my shed. In one respect, I really enjoy the ambitiousness of this plan. There is one concern I have, and that is its density. And I think there are many ideas in here that are valuable. I'm just wondering if there's a way that we can have discussions going into from this council into the next council about maybe focusing on things, especially for this council with only a couple months left to go, if maybe this evening can be used to pick and choose a couple of those items.
Thank you. Other comments?
Yeah, I guess it's more of a question than a comment, and forgive me if it's redundant since I missed the first couple minutes here. But I like the layout of this plan, and I also think that sometimes it's good to be ambitious. It's also good to be holistic if we're talking about a general strategy and the way we want to move the city. And I also like that there are some broad discussions within the document about how we're measuring our success and ultimately who's responsible to get us there. But I don't know if this is premature in the conversation, but how are we, and as Councilor Lee has said, this is there's a lot here. What does tracking this look like? How are we benchmarking this, and how will we know where we're going? Apart from, I know you said doing a check-in in several months, but how are we going to build that out? Those expectations, I guess.
That's a really good question, Councilor Burns. And before I answer that, I did just a comment on what Councilor Stone said about best small city. I'd like to see us be one of the best small cities in the nation. And in terms of your question, Councilor Burns, I'm thinking of something like the monthly initiatives report that we started, and putting something together that would be like that document with dashboards on how we're progressing in those different areas. And
are you looking at setting specific goals around, so success versus failure? I know that it looks like just looking at these metrics broadly, it's generally increasing or generally decreasing something, but in your mind, should we be looking at setting a standard for success or failure and be checking in over time to see our progress to those goals?
yes, we should. We should, and I have every confidence in the team that we have here that we're going to be able to accomplish these things. Some cases it may take us longer to accomplish certain things than others. I think we need to, after this workshop this evening, the department heads and Denise and I need to sit together and talk about what comes out of this workshop and discuss how we move forward and add more meat to this. And I'm sure that the conversation we have over the next hour to 2 hours will be very helpful in doing that. And making sure that we're on the right track in terms of what you're thinking. And if we're missing something, and I don't see this as being all-inclusive. I know there are probably things that are not in here that you would like to have in here, but that's the purpose in having the workshop. If you see something that should be added or there should be more emphasis, we need to know that. Other comments? All right. I was waiting for the pizza to make a break, to eat, and then come back and continue the discussion. But I don't know that, is it here? Okay. Why don't we do that? Why don't we take a break, and then when we come back, we'll delve into this. And thank you very much.
Entire work plan? Yes or no?
Test, 1, 2, 1, 2.
The work plan for FY
I mean, there's an item in there that wasn't even in the budget.
Test.
Building a new public safety building. We're gonna build a new public safety building in FY '18? The council, I mean, there's been contentious debate kicking that out of the budget every year. So, the reality is that this group has my comment to Andy.
Green leads in Turner. We have several little friends from Turner. My daughter's field hockey. Lots of Turner girls.
Test, 1, 2. Test, 1, 2. Check, 1, 2.
Some of you are done reading. We'll take another minute or so if you need more time. Okay, let's take your questions and comments from city councilors. If you have a question, we might turn to one of the department heads to answer, or if you just have a comment, we'd like to hear it.
I have one comment. Some of these partners aren't necessarily city councilors or even city staff when it comes to historical societies and such. And they can be certainly part of this, but there needs to be some communication established from us to saying this is a goal or objective the city has, and so there can be some reporting mechanism back and forth. Otherwise, you're in a vacuum.
Okay, yep. I'm going to take some notes on the screen here, and if I write something that is not a proper characterization of what you said, I hope you'll speak up. Okay, we could talk more about that if you like, or is there another comment? Yes, Councilor Pross.
I think that you know, I'm encouraged by a lot of what I see, most of what I see here. I think that the role of the schools at 8.6 is understated. And I really feel like our neighborhood schools are something that really set us apart as a city. And when you talk about building community as a goal, strengthening our community as a goal, I think that it is wrong to overlook the role of our neighborhood schools in that, especially our elementary schools that I'm speaking to directly there. I think we've got a unique model here that has served our city very well, and I think that we have a lot of potential there to draw more economic development and more people into our community. So when we look at 8.3 and we talk about neighborhoods, I don't really see schools appearing anywhere in that, and the role of the elementary schools in each neighborhood that they serve. Neighborhoods are very important, but I think that at the center of those are the schools, which are listed at 8.6. And I kind of see that there's only a couple lines there. It's actually the smallest one out of all of these. And I think that that's an understated aspect of what it means to.
Let's talk about schools for a little bit, because this came up in our workshop this morning, and I think it's worthy of some explanation.
Councilor Pross. I agree with what you're saying. I think we all agree with what you're saying. I actually had a conversation with the superintendent about coming to this. You had sent me an email suggesting that. I talked to her about it, and she didn't want to be here. I think part of the reason for that was because she didn't, as she told me, school department is not a department of the city. It's a separate entity, were her comments. I think that we need to work closely with the Auburn School Department. There's no question in my mind that that's high priority. And I left it with her that after this workshop, I'd follow up with her, and that we should work closely together on trying to incorporate the school department into this work plan. So I think that you're absolutely right that that's important, and we need to have the school department be part of this. We're building a new high school, and that's going to be a significant change for this community, and we should all be interested and concerned and involved in that. So I agree with you.
Well,
Can I just, let's try to not to focus on the interaction of government entities as part of this. So I wholeheartedly agree with Councilor Pross. So if the politics of school administration is something that Peter needs to work on during this fiscal year, what we can do in fiscal year 18 is through the existing neighborhood relationships that are out there, perhaps we want to encourage the neighborhood watch groups to identify which neighborhood schools are in their area and to communicate with the PTOs and ask the PTOs to get involved. Or as Leroy in the New Auburn neighborhood group does, reach out to the neighborhood school principal, invite him or her to a meeting just to communicate. So let's not get caught up in the interface of government entities, because there's real opportunities for families and those working in these schools to connect with other community members, and maybe that's where the focus ought to be.
so much of the strength of the neighborhoods and the communities that we're talking about here really lies in the schools. And so regardless of, as the mayor said, regardless of the issues that may have come up in recent days, last week, earlier this week with regard to that particular issue we discussed and workshopped, if we're talking about a holistic plan that looks at how we move the city forward along these goals, I think that the schools and the school department and the schools overall as a role in our community and our neighborhoods deserve a much bigger role. We need to recognize that so much of the cords that bind communities together, those neighborhoods together, lies within the schools that those kids go to. And that's a really big part of it that I don't want this group to miss as we go forward on a holistic plan for our city.
Very good. Other comments? Yes, Councilor Titus.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment where it relates to the schools, and we all have to pull together. I'm hoping that this plan will give us pride as a community, and so that not just elected officials and staff members, but the community, the neighborhood groups, everybody takes a piece of this action and takes pride in it. Because we have found the schools cannot fix the problems. The schools cannot fight opiate addiction if the community doesn't want to back them up. We have found that there's very reasons why the schools have issues. Transitioning between schools is a huge one in many neighborhoods that we can't do anything about unless we do something about economic development, making the city a better place and everybody more proud of the city, so that the community is not working against the schools and the community is not working against the police department. So, and as much as I believe the schools are important, they're a tool or a cog in the wheel that make it work. But we can't ask them. We can't say, no, it's all up to you, more counselors, more interventionists, all this stuff is going to fix our problems, and it's not. It's the community itself. And this plan here, we got to narrow it down and decide what we feel is priorities, but the community's got to get behind it and then make it happen. And then they own it.
Right. I'm welcoming other comments from councilors or questions. And if you have a thought about priority, we'd like to hear that. This is an unprioritized list. I don't know if you notice, it's in alphabetical order, but we welcome councilor comments about a sense of priorities. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Years ago, 50, 100 years ago, the church was the kind of the glue for the community of all sizes. Churches were set up by neighborhoods, churches were set up by towns, and the activity of the town kind of revolved around the church of all denominations. And we don't have that now. That's gone. And we also have people that, there was a book called Bowling Alone. I don't know if anybody has read that, about how, there used to be bowling leagues that people would get together and bowl, and it's gone. So I think the schools are the place where we could develop that community cohesiveness. The schools have changed their role. They used to be delivering education. Now they're doing a tremendous amount of work with social services because the family unit is not as strong as it used to be. So I think Councilor Pross is right on, and it's nothing that has cropped up in the last week or two or three. The first thing that was said to me by a very powerful member of the school committee when I took the job was that we don't report to you, you know, and we're separate and equal, and fine, you know, I never suggested that you would, but I think we've got plenty of work to do on the city side, and the schools will have to be kicked in there, but the schools definitely are a key element of the success of the schools. I know when I was in, and I'll be very quick, moving around, corporate moves, so on and so forth, the first thing my wife and I looked at was the strength of the school system. And, you know, and you network, you ask people, if you're moving into a new town, what do you think? And they'd say, well, stay away from this town, and this is a good place to be, because they have a strong school system. So as far as economic development, the schools are a huge economic development engine. And so we got to get beyond this parochialism and the silos that have been built up, and they got to get on board too, and understand the importance of their role in the fabric of the community. Thank you.
Yes, please, Councilor Burns.
Thank you. I was struck by a couple things. One, I think the broad goals are good. I can't poke a hole in any of the broadly the kind of the A1, A2, the broad areas. They seem sensible and like things we've been talking about for a significant amount of time. I'm a little concerned that as I look at this, there seems to be, when I look at the objectives specifically across kind of a range of these, it seems like in some areas we have very broad kind of broad policy goals, going toward a certain kind of broad concept or a broader idea. And then in other areas, we have specific project goals. And I just, as a former almost educator, the thing they drilled into us was, really being able to parse out means from ends when it comes to creating a cohesive strategy or a cohesive plan. I guess I'm a little concerned that it seems like we're, within these objectives, we're kind of mixing means and ends to a certain extent. Like I look at, under A5 in the public safety, we have two project-specific areas under objectives, and then larger, under the measures, like I would almost look at the measures as the broader goal. Like crime rates seems like lowering the crime rate seems like an objective that you would then do something, that you would then create a structure for. I guess I'm just a little concerned that it seems like there seems to be some mixing of those kind of fundamental means and ends in this.
Would the city manager or any department head like to respond to this, maybe reflecting on our process today, or?
I can respond. I mean, I certainly can appreciate what Councilor Burns is saying. I think we all can. This is a fluid process. When we met this morning, it was based on feedback that had been provided to Denise from the department heads, and again, I appreciate what everybody did and the work that Denise did in putting it together. This is not a final product, I would say at this point. That's the purpose in having the discussion. I think the point that was being made here, which I appreciated on this particular topic, was how do you measure what we're achieving? And I think it was the police chief who made the comment about, well, we look at the crime rates and we look at the response times, and that's how we're measuring whether we're accomplishing what we want to do. And it certainly made sense to me. I think we need to capture that data where we can to be able to measure how well we're doing in certain areas. So That was the logic behind it.
So that would be specifically under the objective of, say, increasing public safety. Those would be the metrics that we were, I guess, so as we move forward and look to refine this plan, I guess my hope would be that for every objective we lay out, we are sure that there is a corresponding metric that we're measuring it by. I think right now, as you said, this is a kind of a raw document, but it seems like as it stands right now, there's a mismatch between what we're hoping to achieve and what we're hoping to measure. And, I don't know if we need to get too far into the weeds into that
probably
in this
not,
conversation, but that's just a broad concern.
Just to add to, in response to your question, some of these, it was, for lack of a better word, a lofty or just a more hierarchical viewpoint, but some of them we really didn't want to lose the initiatives that are already in place. So you're going to see things like the ag study in the objective, and yes, it's a tactical or not so much a strategy, but what I'm hearing from you is maybe we need to reword and a hierarchy of like an objective and then identify. We just didn't want to lose some of the initiatives that are currently undergoing in the respective departments.
Well, I guess it comes back to what the goal of the document itself is. If this is a work plan to move through a certain set of projects that adhere to a certain strategy that's already been determined, then we don't need to mix our larger strategic aims with a more specific work plan. But if we don't have a more overarching set of strategic goals, then I don't want for us to get. It's a good way to get lost strategically if you don't make those things very clear. And I just want to make sure that we're focusing on the actual outcomes we want to see from this document in terms of how high up we're going in our aims.
Okay, very good. Any other questions or comments from councilors? Yes, sir.
We should keep in mind that government doesn't have to do everything, and there may be some organizations within our community that maybe are not taking this on full force, but are working on similar parallel lines, so to speak, and to partner with them. But it goes back to communicating and knowing what's going on in our community.
Can I push a little bit on that? Is there one area or issue in particular that you think we should be partnering more effectively with community organizations?
Well, I'm not aware of everything that's going on in the community, but I don't think everybody here is either. But there has to be a list of organizations which probably have certain goals and objectives that are probably written down someplace.
Struck out to me, and I don't want to crawl too deep into the weeds and look at something and pull it out as an intentional omission, but we're talking about growing the Arts Walk, but we don't list as a partner organization LA Arts, and I'm hoping that's unintentional. I'm guessing it's unintentional.
We actually talked about LA Arts when we had the discussion.
Okay.
It would be a chore to try to identify those organizations. So we may find some organizations struggling to accomplish some sort of a goal, and
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Yes, Councilor Burns.
I guess I have two more short points or questions. The first one, kind of dovetailing off of what Councilor Lee had mentioned. I know, not to skip ahead to another section, but there is a section where it seems to be talking about increasing our volunteerism within the city, and filling vacancies within our agencies, boards, and commissions. If we can, in the same way that LA Arts is fundamentally tied to the Art Walk, it would be fruitful, I think, to look at how if we are looking to staff up, if we're looking to fill these voluntary boards, it's helpful to give them useful purpose. So looking at, just as we're looking at these more project-specific goals, maybe as part of that checklist, what are the ABCs, what are the voluntary groups within the city that we could be pulling in? The other point, this is just a question, really. I mean, within this document, there's a lot of kind of what questions, like you know, what are we trying to achieve? And there's very few, there's no how in terms of what are the actual, like, what are the you know, how are we going to achieve these goals? I'm assuming that is for a later date. That's not supposed to be part of this plan, or?
Do you or someone want to speak to that? I can say that I was pushed the group this morning to be disciplined in not listing all the details of how each of these things would accomplish. Frankly, mostly for your benefit, because as I discussed with the department heads this morning, the counselors want to see what is to be achieved. How to achieve it is more the responsibility of the staff. At least that's the way I portrayed it, and so a lot of those details are not here. That doesn't mean they don't exist, though. I know that these two are thinking about that day and night. I hope I haven't stolen your thunder.
No, I think you explained it well, and as you know from what you've read, a number of these initiatives that are referred to in this work plan are things that are already underway that we're working on, and like for example, the sports tourism with the Huddle Up firm that's coming in next week. You'll be hearing from them at the council meeting on the 18th. And there are different meetings that they're going to be having, or the ag study and the work that's being done on that, and so on and so forth. So, as Craig said, we tried not to get too far into the weeds on those things, but we can provide more detail on it.
I figured it was probably an intentional omission. I just wanted to be sure.
That's the short way to say it, intentional omission. I love it. We've got about 10 minutes, even actually just 5 minutes left on this topic. Please.
Yeah, real quick. I want to thank staff and you guys for putting this together, because I really think this is a fantastic document to get started with, and I think it's going to grow and progress. I'd also like to see this, eventually become part of the budget process, and that when you're budgeting, this is our goals and objectives and what we're going to use the money for. But I want to take one exception with what you just said, and that is that for us as counselors, the how is more important than the what. Because study after study as a counselor, and before I was a counselor, I saw all these objectives and these reports, and everything was done about what we needed to do and how we were going to measure it. And we've really not done a good job of communicating the measurement and how we're getting there and why it didn't work and why we did something different. So moving forward for me is going to be to see, the opioid crisis is one that I am really kind of looking at closely, because my neighborhood watch groups, both of them, are concerned about it. I really want to see them get education somehow, some way, how they can see what's going on and identify it and report it, or those kinds of things. I want the how, and I need the how. And so if we have a meeting like this, and I was looking at the last one that we had here, the minutes from our last meeting, and I don't know that I see a lot of hows coming from that last one we had, and that was 4 months ago. So going forward, it's going to be important to me, okay, this is what our objective is, reduce crime rates, and this is how we're doing it, and a report somehow showing us what we're doing to make that happen. And it also helps staff too, because people will know what they're doing. We know what they're doing. We know what's going on. We know that it's not just a piece of paper with a bunch of objectives on it. It's actually something that's working. And I know what's being done. We don't communicate it well enough. But you want to see what it is. Yep, very good. Please.
Yeah, I think the development of the how is definitely staff's job, but the decision of which how to fund is the job of the council. Okay. And so understanding what the options are is incredibly helpful for the council.
Okay, this is really helpful. Any last comments on Section A, strengthening our communities?
I'll make one quick one. I know a company that just went out and hired 36 people, new employees. They're desperately in need of people. And 19 of them flunked the drug test. So if that is a huge problem, and this is a Lewiston Auburn company, 19 of them. So when you look at opioid, it is huge, and it's now translating more from away from a public safety issue into an economic issue. because there are 19 people that wanted to work but couldn't because they were, you know, they were users. And, you know, this is something that's eating away at our community. That's all I'll say.
So I had the same idea. Okay, before we thanks for that comment, by the way. Before we leave this, are there any department heads that would like to make any kind of comment or clarification about anything in this section A about strengthening the community?
I would just echo what Councilor Stone just said. I think, Peter, when you drove by me in the parking garage yesterday, I was talking to two gentlemen, and both of them, they have their own business, and both of them were asking me about the drug issue because they have let people go, they're doing their backgrounds, and if they're going into people's homes, they've got drug convictions, and they can't bring them into their homes, or they're not showing up for work. So employment is huge on this issue. So you're right, you're absolutely right. It's not just public safety, it is an economic driver for us as a community.
Any last comments from any other department heads? Let's move to section B. Same drill. We're going to give you a chance to just read through this so you're familiar with the content. And then after 3 or 4 minutes of quiet time, we'll take your questions and reactions. We're on section B, growing our economy. But we'll give another minute or two for those of you who are still skimming through this section. Okay, let's take your questions or comments, and just a reminder that if there's something here that you'd like a little explanation of, or that you don't understand, just ask, and department heads will be happy to explain more if there's something that's not self-evident. I saw Councilor Titus had a hand up first, and then we'll go to Councilor Young. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. First of all, and we have an economic development department now that I think is it fully staffed? It is, very good, very good. One of the first comments I wanted to make, I was looking at the first page of this presentation where it talked about long-term goals, and in this area of economic growth, or growing the economy, item 1 was the strategic collaborative partnerships. I felt that should be short-term goals, not long-term goals, and I should think that that should be specifically in this plan immediately, because we have learned that gaining strategic partnerships is valuable. It brings in industry. We have industrial parks in the city that need to be filled, and the only way we're going to fill them is through networking and getting involved in strategic partnerships. So that should not be a long-term goal. That should be front and center. One of the things that we should be spending a lot of time on as well, I think. Yep. Then the other thing I was talking about was, one piece I noticed was increased legislative advocacy at state and federal levels.
Yeah.
This is very important and should actually be part of almost every department head's, through the manager, of course. I'm not saying that every department head goes to Augusta, but every department head has skin in the game when it comes to legislative decisions. And I don't think that this city, along with many others, have done a good enough job in the past, anyway, of fighting for what's ours and what we deserve in that area. So I think that's great. And then the last thing I'll just comment, although there's a lot that could be commented on, is when we talk about workforce development and we have the school department. And again, it goes back to counter to what we were saying before. The school department says they're not a division, they're not a department of the city. And what is their workforce development plan, which usually is to develop kids to go to college, which usually sends them away because we don't have the high-tech jobs to support somebody with a 4 or 8 year degree. So what would they be willing to do to help us? I know we got a new high school going in, and I understand there may be some plans of some technical education to go along with that. That should be part of this as a long-term thing to say, okay, is that feasible when it comes to workforce development and how the school can help? But also right now, we're talking about the PAL centers doing some certain things, but maybe we can get the school to help. Aren't they supposed to be helping with education to make people ready for the workforce?
Okay.
So, thanks.
Okay, thanks for your comments. Yes, Councilor Young.
Yes, something jumped out at me, and it was interesting that it was there, is not to promote a negative image of the city. And maybe we don't do that well at that, because when we see something wrong, we tend to highlight it, maybe because we want to change it, but I guess there is something to be said about negative promotion. Some things are perceptions, are strictly that, just perceptions, not reality. So what are we looking for here from that? Are we looking for more statements of to accent the positive versus the negative? Or are we ignoring the elephant that's in the room?
Yeah. Do any department heads want to speak to it? We had a discussion this morning about branding and marketing, and let's fill them in a little bit.
One of the things that our department has faced is we work really hard to try to have a reputation for being user-friendly for developments. And it's, if you ever hear from a constituent that they're not happy with the service that they received in our department, it would be much better if you come and talk to us. We want to know the specifics, what property, what happened, so we can really address it rather than just communicate that problem to other people. Really want the chance to fix it rather than promote it as a problem.
Actually, that came up last week, and I suggested they contact the city manager and talk to them about it. And thank them for doing business with Auburn.
That's perfect. That's what we're hoping for, so we can fix any problems that exist.
I didn't know if anything could be fixed or whether the person's just being negative, but wasn't anything I could do about it at the time.
Do any other, yes, let's go to Councilor Lee, but if any other department heads want to speak to this customer service, branding, or marketing messaging, that might be interesting to hear. But, Are there any other department heads that want to speak to this issue of image, promoting a positive image throughout the city? Okay. Okay. Thanks for your deferment.
So, I was looking at B3, and I guess this is another place for prioritization. I think at least the last 3 councils, and from most of the basis of our understanding from much staff work that's been done, the best way to achieve economic growth and valuation is with downtown development. It's the most effective, it's the most efficient, and I see that amongst 5 other bullet points here that are somewhat a scattered strategy. And so I'd certainly like to see us, and I feel like many councils have conveyed that they'd like to see a focus on downtown development. Along with that question, I just want to understand the thinking that B4 is separated from the remainder of the objectives for development in B3.
You're asking why B4 is separate from the other development issues? Okay, that's something that we talked about this morning. Please.
I'll address that. I think because that project is so significant, and we're going to be implementing that, and are in fact starting to implement it now, and we're looking at investing upwards of $3 million or more over the next 2 to 3 years. That is a really important project going on right now. So I felt that it deserved to stand alone by itself. I think other people felt the same way. As far as your comments about the downtown, I think we all want to try and develop the downtown area, and there are other opportunities as well that we see in terms of recreational development, like the recent vote by the council in terms of the recreational development issue. And it's a very interesting question for us as a city. We've got these different opportunities, so how do we focus our energy in our efforts in order to accomplish what needs to be done? And that's a very important role that the mayor and the council play in terms of giving the direction to my office and to the department heads. But I appreciate the comments.
I think toward that end, I'd like to see within this something that we definitely talked about the other night, which is reviewing our active TIFs and starting to utilize the money that we have within some of those TIF funds to narrow in on some of these objectives that we've placed here.
Okay. Yes, Councilor Pross, and then Councilor Burns.
Couple of things. Under B2, branding and marketing, one thing I don't see here that I think that we could dovetail off of is being a gateway community toward the ski areas. Sunday River, Sugarloaf, people heading to those destinations, Lost Valley, but especially the bigger places, whether it's for mountain biking in the summertime up in the Carabassa Valley region, or heading up to Sunday River or Sugarloaf for skiing. I think we have a big opportunity there that the state has been behind in terms of highway signage. Obviously, we struggle to compete against I-295 as I-95, and we do have signage on exit 75 geared toward those people. So I think that I would really like to see us as a gateway to some of these sort of the outskirts of the White Mountain National Park. I know some of that does lie in Maine, but the mountain regions, I'd like to see us focus a little bit on the gateway to those recreational areas, and I don't see that listed. I think also that, and I see under B3 development opportunities, marijuana industry development is item number 6 here. I think that this city council, and I'm proud of this city council for sort of taking a stand and not enacting a moratorium as many other communities have done. I think that we are already a big factor in the statewide medical marijuana industry with the types of industry that's happening here in that regard, and that we can really capitalize on that. So I see that 6th bullet point as hopefully being a little bit closer to the top, but also dovetailing into some of these other things like downtown development. We're going to have retail and marijuana across the state, except for those communities that have closed the door to that through moratorium. Growing the creative economy, I see a little bit as a part of that. Industrial and commercial development. I mean, grow operations that are existing here in this community that have been here for the long term. They stand to expand their operations, and that's all related to marijuana industry development. So I think that should be a little higher on that list there. And not that they're necessarily ordinal, but I do want to make that connection in my comments here. The other thing that I did want to add was with regard to the ag zone, which is B sub 1, agricultural investment. I too, of course, am very eager for the results of the ag study, and I'm really pleased to see a lot of what I see in here with regard to buying local, supporting local farmers. I think that what we did on Monday night was a good move in the right direction in terms of eliminating some of these barriers that exist within this really huge zone. And as long as we can continue to go down that road on a reasonable path that doesn't compromise environmental values that we have in this community, I think that's something that we really need to continue to focus on as well.
Okay, very good. Councilor Burns.
Thank you. Looking at B sub 3, I had a couple of questions. Under the objectives for neighborhood development, what exactly are we referring to there, and why is it substantially different than the neighborhood
The community
portion of A? I guess I'm just looking for clarification on what.
Yeah, so what he's mentioning is that neighborhood development is under the list of development activities in this section.
Yes.
But yet it's got its own section in the strengthening our communities, and he's wondering why that is.
Well, like what do we mean by neighborhood development in this context?
I think my thought on this, and from other people, from talking with the mayor and each of you, and department heads and others, is the idea of trying to develop the city as a city of neighborhoods. As you know, I worked in Portland for a number of years. My office was there. I thought Portland did a really good job in terms of trying to do that. I see that as being an opportunity for this city. I've been very impressed with the New Auburn Association group that I've had an opportunity to be able to talk with a few times. And I can see the benefit of being able to have other neighborhood groups similar to that for a lot of reasons. Did I say something? I think that's the idea behind that. It can be a pillar for the community, one of the pillars that we can build on.
So do you mean neighborhood identity development?
Yes, that's certainly part of it.
Okay, so it's a different sort of development than the rest of the developments we're talking about, I guess. And then, so just like Councilor Lee mentioned, you know, the importance of downtown development. I think we've, within this term, have talked a lot about how essential it is to our economic growth. With that in mind, under the metrics for success, I'm wondering if it might be useful for us to think about, you know, are we promoting infill in our downtown? Really, you know, especially with our big push for form-based code. I think that is something that the city has already committed a lot of time and energy toward, promoting higher density and better use and better development within the downtown. So if we're looking for a good metric to capture that, I think, you know, looking at infill might be a good way to do it.
Good. Again, if there's any department heads that would like to clarify something, educate counselors about some of the conversation we had earlier today, I invite you to do that.
Craig, I would just add to that neighborhood development. I think what we are also speaking of is that we have neighborhoods that are disconnected from other services and opportunities. And so if we look at a neighborhood to develop that neighborhood of, you know, we have some neighborhoods that have no access to even a convenience store. So what does that do? It then drives them out across a 4-lane highway on Center Street to get across the street to a convenience store. But if we could develop a neighborhood where we could put a neighborhood store in, Turner and Whitney Street neighborhood is what we were talking about. So how do we do that? So that was part of that neighborhood development, looking for an assessment, a needs assessment of each of those neighborhoods, and then identify, okay, now how can we partner with businesses that might be able to come into those neighborhoods? So.
That makes a lot of sense, and thanks for the clarification. I think, especially, you know, we talked a lot about, again, within this term, the use of neighborhood stores, and, you know, creating that, you know, in our conversations about Hampshire Street, I think specifically this came up a lot about what does vibrancy look like. So I guess if we are, you know, if we're talking about neighborhood development, I'm glad then that that's there, if we're talking about creating that sense of vibrancy with promoting that sustainability within our neighborhoods. So thanks for that.
Any other comments? We've got 5 or 10 minutes left on this section. We can go on to the next if you want, but are there any more comments on growing the economy?
Just on the infill comment, we did cover that in section D some too, but I think there's a lot of overlap there for infill.
Excellent.
Last call for questions or comments on growing our economy. Please.
One of the, I think it's absolutely critical. If you look at the record over the last 10 to 12 years of Auburn's taxable valuation, you'll see that it's been pretty much flat. And in that period of time, we have seen inflation. It's been generally under control, but it's every time you have an annual inflation, you're eroding your buying power and what the city can get for its tax dollar. So I think that we have to become very good at development. And I think we have to really understand the difference between marketing and sales. Marketing is, you know, basically putting together what you plan for selling the product, but sales is the actual picking up the telephone or banging on the customer's door and getting the business. And so I just want to make sure that I made the comment here that sales is, you can't sit and wait for the customers to come to us. There will be a lot of that naturally because people do a lot of studies as to where they're going to locate their next business and so on, the next store and so on and so forth. But we really need to be active in selling the community. And the other thing that we just should keep our eye on our relationship to Portland. You know, I see the Portland Metroplex expanding. You see what's the impact it's had in the towns like Scarborough and Gorham and Westbrook and so on and so forth. But we're not far from Portland. When, you know, if you get on the turnpike at exit 53 and go to exit 75, that's what, 22 miles. At 80 miles an hour, I didn't say that, Chief, it's a very, very quick ride down the turnpike to Portland and to the Falmouth area and so on and so forth. So, you know, I guess I question us positioning ourselves to be separate and distinct from Portland. Maybe there's a role for us to play as being part of the greater Portland economy in terms of residents and residential, the cost of residential housing, so on and so forth. So, you know, we can very easily become a quote-unquote bedroom community of Portland. And if you get on the pike going down and coming back at night, A lot of people are commuting to Portland, and a lot of people are commuting from Portland to Lewiston and Auburn. And so, you know, I just want to make that point. And it's much broader, it's a much broader question than a annual work plan, but I think we might want to think about it.
Okay.
And just start planting the seed to think, can we capitalize on being close to Portland?
Okay, yes, final comments on the economy section.
Yeah, just a question. I noticed that the B sub 5, partnerships and volunteerism, in what way are we framing this through the lens of economic development rather than through, say, community development? I guess I'm just curious as to the justification for putting it in this section specifically.
Any department heads want to take a shot at that? Why is, let's hear from the librarian.
For me and in my experience, for myself and in my experience, when I have volunteered in a particular area, I become very much like an owner of that area's representation. So I want to be proud, and I'm, investing myself. So I expect, that investment to pay off for the community. So I think that's what volunteerism does.
Okay, so there's one reason. Other thoughts about the connection between volunteerism and economic development? I remember talking this morning about companies helping to provide volunteers in terms of employees, and that's why the connection of partnerships and volunteers, there was some hope that companies might sponsor events, promote events, and also encourage their employees to volunteer for events. I'm just remembering this morning's discussion.
I guess I would just be cognizant of not seeing commitment to promoting volunteerism get lost in the maw of what I would imagine to be larger economic development goals, which I guess is really the basis for my question.
Yeah.
But as long as it happens, I'm happy.
Okay. Yeah.
That's probably a good point to end at. But I think part of the checklist for a vibrant, active, forward-moving community is the involvement of the volunteers that you have in the community. And I heard today at a meeting that I went to with business and community leaders, where there was a local businessman who was talking about how impressed he is with the number of people that are actively engaged in various activities in Auburn. I think that's a good sign, and I know you're very involved with the appointments committee, and you see that on a regular basis. So from my standpoint, I think that's kind of a checklist on how we're doing as a community, and if we can do a better job in getting people involved, I think that's going to help us in terms of what we're trying to accomplish. It's not what you would consider pure economic development, but I think it's an important ingredient to it. So that's where I'm coming from on that issue.
Sure, and I am sure it's a quibble and much ado about nothing, but you said community about 7 times. You said economic once. So just in terms of the lens that we're looking at it through, to me it would make more sense to put it in A, but again, it really doesn't matter. So I'll stop arguing about it.
Okay, we've talked about this section. We are right on track, almost to the minute. We're halfway through. Let's turn to building a sustainable city. We're going to give 3 or 4 minutes reading time, maybe closer to 3 minutes. This is a shorter section, and then we'll take your questions and comments. I think you're reading faster and faster as the night wears on here.
Reading ahead.
Oh, and reading ahead, is that what's going on? Okay. Does anybody need more time on this? Just put a hand up, it's no problem. Seeing none, let's jump into building a sustainable city. What are questions or comments from councilors on this topic? Please.
I'll start it off. What I'd like to do in this one is just kind of go over generalities of categories, I think, a little bit. First of all, the first one, the C2, that first of the background dams, I think is very important. I think that's a project that's very complex. I don't quite understand all the nuances there, but I think we've made some progress, and I'm very glad that we're going to continue to do so. The C2, though, I wanted to bring that up only because when a more walkable city and a more beautiful city, I think we're all in favor of that, but I also know that that's primarily budgeting more than anything else. I mean, we'd love to have a lot more sidewalks and a lot more opportunity to beautify the city, but it's really a budgetary item more than a desire. I mean, I think almost everybody would love to do it. So my question was, is any of this is supposed to be an FY18 work plan? Is there money in the CIP to achieve anything in this area? Or is it something that will have to be looked at for FY19? Because I don't remember seeing a lot of stuff in the CIP that had to do with beautification of the cities.
I think it's an ongoing effort. Dan, do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I would say that the current CIP for FY18 does include this. It's not specific in nature, but things like the Hampshire Street project where we're adding pedestrian scale lighting, on-street amenities like benches and plantings, and that gets to that point. It's not specifically called out as a beautification project, but it in fact is, as part of the road reconstruction project. Park Avenue, which we just completed, same idea. It's got bike lanes, it's got a sidewalk. There are projects ongoing that, as part of the CIP, this happens, but it's not specifically called a beautification or something like that. Like Cook Street, we're connecting sides, we're completing the sidewalk, so it goes through the entire thing, the entire street. It exists, it's just not specific in nature as called a beautification project.
Okay, I would agree with that, but I think that also looking at the New Auburn project as an example, there's a lot of that will include that too. It's already part of something else. The other part was in section C3, 2 points. One of them was working better with the sewer and water department regarding improvements. I know this is a subject that's been looked at many times in the past. I've given it a stab. I'm going to give it another stab. But I think that this is definitely very important, although there needs to be some sort of progress report to see what the next step is. I think everybody's in a holding pattern with that one. Where do we go next? Do we bring all the parties into one room? Let's please do that. That'd be interesting. And then in this area is also the measure, how to measure success. When it's meeting life cycle replacement plans for facilities and equipment, less failure and repair, would this possibly lead to reserve funds? When we know we have items that need to be replaced eventually anyway. I don't know how people feel about reserve funds. I know I've gone down that road before. It's not a popular subject within municipal government. It always has been in the county government, but not so much in the city government. So I'm in favor of them to a degree when we know we're going to replace something anyway. So I would make that question off to staff. And then
well, let's pause there if we can for a moment and try to answer that question. Are we anticipating establishing reserve funds once we establish a replacement schedule?
I think it makes good, sound financial management to have some reserve funds that are dedicated for certain things. That was happening in Lewiston when I worked for the city of Lewiston for about 10 years. It's common practice by municipalities as well as counties, but I think it needs to be done carefully and thoughtfully. Jill, do you have anything you want to add to that?
We did that with the ambulance, the EMS, and we specifically did that. You know, it requires funds to do that, and as long as budgets are as tight as they have been, we would have to budget for that, you know, each year in order to do that. So I have nothing against that. I think it's a great idea if we can afford to do that. then we don't have to bond all the time
Yeah.
for those,
Yeah.
you know, but we have to be able to fit it in the budget and still do all the things we need to do and be cognizant of the mill rate. So, you know,
Well, I'd be definitely in favor of that too, and with the good reporting that you give us every meeting, or, you know, every month at least, reporting that shows that, what's going on in that area, that would definitely give us we could measure it, see what's going on with it, just like a TIF account report, so we get that kind of thing.
Okay. I know that you had another point, and I interrupted you. Is there more that you wanted to say, maybe on a different
Just,
topic?
just one more item,
Please.
and that was on C4.
Okay.
This talks about
The inventory.
inventory of land, and this has been a subject of mine, as most people know, since I've been a counselor. And unfortunately, I have 2 more years of it. Sorry, Peter. I hope, anyway. I may be the first counselor that doesn't get elected without an opposition, but who knows? But anyway, the philosophy here, before we go down this road again, we already got a policy that we've worked on. We've got some stuff already in the works, but I think that it really needs to have a policy workshop on what we want to do with land that we have, so it's transparent what we're doing. Because too many times, I use the point, do we want to sell it to a housing person, or do we want to sell it to somebody who's going to build a strip mall? Well, we're going to decide that by policy, I guess. Well, if that's the case, we need to talk about that, so that it's not something that's done behind closed doors all the time. That we have a policy, this is what we want to do with this land, and we put the RFPs out there and we make it happen. But too many times, we sit there on land, and then we decide what we want to do with it behind closed doors, and then people get suspicious. So I think we got to have a policy workshop on this before we go too much further.
Just a quick comment. I think that makes a lot of sense, and we had a city property-owned committee meeting the other day, and Jody and I sat in on that with the other folks that were there, and I think that everybody who's involved in that effort would welcome having a workshop. And I think that's a good step for us to take.
I think sort of along those same lines, and this is a challenge largely to the council in post FY18, but also somewhat to are we in the right direction to staff, is I think we need to, when we build budgets, think of C2, C3, and C4 all at the same time rather than as individual components, because some of our objectives, say, when it comes to downtown beautification, are going to have impacts on C4 and infrastructure improvements in either of or any of the neighborhoods is going to have similar effects on the other aspects that we're looking for. So I think we need to think about those things all together in the future. And that's a larger conversation with staff and with the council at the same time in building those budgetary policies.
Okay. Other questions or comments? Councilor Burns and then Councilor Young.
Thank you. I guess off of Councilor Lee's point about kind of integrating those components, does the city have a beautification strategy, or is it just project specific? Like how do we decide how we beautify when we develop our infrastructure?
Anybody answer that? The Public Services Director or the Economic Development?
Dan spoke a little bit about the plans for the current year. We are working on a few different ideas or reviews for different areas that we think need some attention. The Riverwalk is one of them. It's been quite a while since we've made substantial reinvestment in that. The connection between here and the Riverwalk along Main Street, we're looking at some ideas for that. It's not a straight shot to walk from the parking garage to cross Main Street. You have to walk out to the street, walk up the sidewalk, cross. It's just inconvenient. So we try to identify problem areas and then work for ideas. We're working with Maine DOT on bike and pedestrian improvements. They identified Court Street as a top priority through their safety program this year. So that's a big one that could line up with the city's goals.
But just that's helpful to know. But just to be clear, as we implement new infrastructure projects, there's no sort of like check down for how is this impacting beautification or the image of the city? Is that something that gets considered within kind of the prospectus of a project?
I would say in terms of road reconstruction projects, yes, there's a neighborhood meeting, it goes to the bike pedestrian committee, they review it for those type of amenities, but in terms of plantings, and it's more of a, we'd love to do it, do we have the budget to do it, include it? And then if we don't, things like Hampshire Street get brought back and money's added, but it's not there's no set, this street should receive this treatment, or this street should receive that treatment, no.
Okay, that's just, that was more of a point of curiosity. The broader question I had about this category, you know, the title is Building a Sustainable City. I guess, what type of sustainability are we referring to? Are we referring to fiscal sustainability or ecological sustainability? Both? Is it both?
Yes.
Okay.
I'd say it is.
So I guess to that point, the most noticeable omission in this that I noticed was nothing, apart from C1, which is arguably relating to the environment of the city. I didn't see any real specific objective language around increasing the sustainability of the city in terms of our ecology or energy usage, environment, the things that I normally think of around the concept of sustainability. There didn't seem to be anything kind of broken out in that way. So is that something that, I know we had the workshop regarding our energy auditing. Is it worth it for us to have a more comprehensive environmental sustainability plan?
Yes, yeah, I, with no hesitation. I think it would make a lot of sense. You know, as we move forward and we look at the next budget and what are the key elements to that budget, I think sustainability is an important part of that discussion. I know that Derek Belanger is doing a lot of work in that area, and I think it needs to be a high priority.
I know it might not be something we get to in this FY, but it's worth putting there if it's a goal that we want to achieve. I did see the increased infill development, so glad to see that on the list.
Councilor Young, you've been waiting. Thank you.
I see that we have the downtown listed as a priority to develop, and it's certainly there's gas lines and sewer and water and everything there, but as far as the shopping district, well, we have a food chain shopping center there, and we have a lot of different things, churches and library, and but a lot of it's some more office buildings and such, and the majority of our shopping district is moved. It's down Center Street. It's over at the mall, and that seems to be where our downtown is now. And then the mayor will disagree with me there, but that's where people shop, and that's what people traditionally think of as downtown. So I was just wondering what our vision is. Are we going to try to bring shops and say what they have over in Lewiston more over on this side of the river too? What's the reality of this whole thing? Because it looks to me that our downtown is mostly residential now.
Is there a plan to bring more retail to the downtown?
Created a program last year to do that.
We do work to try to attract the higher foot traffic uses to the downtown. The STAR program would be one example of trying to do that. There are a lot of offices though, and if the offices are paying their rent, it's, you know, they stay for a long time. Over time, hopefully we can have more first floor retail, second floor office, and maybe upper story residential. But a lot of it's based on private decisions, and we are working with one on Main Street right now to try to convert from an office use to retail or restaurant. But it's slow, and it's a lot of small spaces, so it's incremental progress over time. There's not one big project that changes the face of the street.
But I'm pleased with the way it looks. I mean, it's really, you know, where else can you live in Maine and actually be within a couple of steps from, say, you know, Food Town, or what was it? Not Food Town, but Hannaford, I'm just dating myself, you know, you don't see that very often.
A downtown grocery store is an incredible asset, and they'll be giving that store a facelift soon.
Other comments on economic or sustainable city? Yeah.
Thank you. Just kind of go just right down the list here. C1, you talk about it talks about the Barker Mill Dam, and under how this supports our long-term goals, there's a blank spot, and I just want to emphasize the New Auburn Village, and I really see what happens with that licensing process as really important to what we do down in the New Auburn Village and the investments that we've already made around Little Andy Park and in that community generally. So I would like to see that Y filled in under C1 with reference to the New Auburn Village. Under C.2, there's some reference to the Riverwalk under objective, a more walkable, attractive of downtown, more attractive, livable city. I think what's missing from this list is reference to the river itself and outdoor recreational opportunities that the river provides, whether it's fishing or paddling or organizing communities around cleaning it up and keeping it clean. I know that the city has partnered with other organizations to ensure that those types of things happen, and many organizations have made efforts to, whether it's highlighting it as a fishing destination or what have you. So I think that the river itself deserves a little bit more attention in that section of this. I agree with Councilor Burns under C.3 about sustainability with solar power. I see a lot of communities, you see solar farms cropping up everywhere, and as I drive down the highways in my travels, I can't help wonder why with all of our ag zone and different lands that we have available to us, we don't have our own solar farm here in Auburn to help provide some power. And maybe that's a longer-term objective. And with regard to C.4, the only thing I wanted to say was that, you know, we had some criticism the other night at our meeting with regard to, or maybe it was last week, not having properties listed for sale, public owned. I believe that we've taken the right approach on that. When you're talking about downtown properties, you want to be strategic in how they're dispossessed. So I think that that's really important, and I'm completely against just putting things on the open market and letting the market dictate how much the city's going to get. The return on those properties, the amount of money that we get for those properties is not the only variable. What happens to them is probably way more important than the dollar value of the purchase and sale agreement.
Very good. Any last comments? And I'm encouraging any department heads to speak up and clarify any aspect of this if you'd like to, or any last comments from councilors. Okay. All right, then, it's on to the last, leading in public service. You know the drill. We're going to take a couple minutes of quiet time, and then we'll take your questions or comments.
Sabrina got really excited there for a moment.
Yeah, thanks. Section 1, so D sub 1, in terms of prioritizing the items in the CIP, help walk me through what that looks like vis-a-vis right now. Like, what does a city that prioritizes the items in its CIP look like compared to where we are right now?
I think it's probably a continuation of what we've been doing. I think we all know budgeting is a fluid process, right? As Jill indicated, you know, a lot depends on what's happening in terms of the economy and the revenues coming into the city and so forth. But I think we're just going to try and make sure we're doing the best job we can in terms of prioritization.
Great. And this is just a clarifying question on D sub 2. What is SharePoint?
Good question. I thought someone would ask that. Paul, you want to take that?
SharePoint is Microsoft's cloud-based collaboration software. So we will be implementing that, and we'll also extend that out to the council as a secure area to share documents between yourselves.
Awesome. The only other kind of point I had, I guess it's still under D sub 2, under the establishment of council rules, communications guidelines, et cetera, I think, and this was particularly apparent to me as a counselor who came in new in a period of heavy turnover, if we're talking about creating better kind of support for the counselors themselves in terms of orienting us in our role as counselors, I think the city as a more stable and non-political structure, it may be helpful to create a suite of orientation materials specific to incoming counselors on not just norms and procedure, which I think are important and are not necessarily intuitive. No one's born knowing Robert's rules, but just having within the city the capacity to help guide incoming counselors in the process of what being a counselor looks like, because certainly there's no roadmap. But I think if we're looking for stability and good governance, it could be helpful to house some of that on the city side, so that we can set those norms from day one.
I know we're not supposed to get too deep into the weeds, but I feel like I'm really excited to see D2 in here, because it gives us, as a council, an opportunity to set some of our own rules. And just from observation, I think some things that we could do much better are clearer full council direction to staff on issues, particularly at workshops. We sort of end open-ended without a very clear direction to staff as to what we're looking for. I think definitely something that needs to get implemented is no council email deliberations, not only because it probably violates FOA, but it leads to unclear direction in the same manner to staff, because it's one or two counselors who might be guiding a policy directive rather than a majority of the council, which is, as a governing body, how it's supposed to work. I think another thing that should be on here is better reports out of executive session materials. That's definitely something I've heard from the public. So once something ceases to be confidential, I think we need to have a more uniform system of reporting those things out to the public and handing those documents out to the public. So again, I'd also like to hear staff's communications on that, because it's great that this got put on here.
Sure, and then I do want to call for any department heads, if you want to speak to this from the staff side, why this is on the list. We'd love to hear from you, but let's take Councilor Stone's comment first, and then if there are any staff that want to speak to this communications issue, that might be helpful.
I have a question rather than a comment, directed to the city manager. When we the first time Mr. Freshley came here, we had a workshop when he just joined, and we set some guidelines. Basically, one of the guidelines was that operational aspects would be the purview of the city manager to deal with, and policy issues would be just, handled by, not entirely handled by, but it would be the city councils. How is that working?
I think it's working pretty well, but I think there still is improvement that's needed. It's an interesting question because my experience in municipal and county government, I know that some contact between councilors and the mayor and staff is a good thing. But I think for the city to be able to function well, and for the department heads and all of us who are the staff to be able to do our jobs well, and my experience has been that it works best when it flows through the city manager's office or county manager's office, whatever the case may be, with the support of in this case, the mayor and the council. I think it's, in some ways, still a work in progress. And I think some of it is having the trust and confidence in the city manager's office to be able to handle let's say, the council concerns that come. And I know that that's a work in progress. I think we're doing a pretty good job with that, but I think there are more council concerns that are going to department heads than I would have expected. So that's something that I need to work on. As you know, I'm working on trying to formalize the councilor constituent concerns process. Jody and Denise and I have talked about that. Jody is working with me on doing that. I'm looking at doing a monthly update for you on that. And my goal is to have those concerns come through the city manager's office as much as possible.
So I've taken some notes here to reflect his reaction to your question. How's it working? Any more thoughts on the council communications issues that staff put on the table? Yeah.
Ross,
Go ahead, Councilor Prost.
Mine was more about customer service communication, so I don't want to skip ahead.
Well, let's skip ahead. There don't seem to be any other comments, and if they are, they'll raise a hand. So,
an observation that I've made over my tenure here as a city councilor was with regard to the lack of coordination between the school department and the city itself. And that's something that I've raised in the past, and I see that issue sort of lacking under D.3 here. One time I came to the school, or to this building, where our school department is on the 4th floor. I came to this building for a school department meeting as the mayor's appointee to the school committee, and I had to be somewhere, and it wasn't where I expected it to be in this building. And so I stood right here out in the hallway, looking at the screen up on the television there, looking for information about where I was supposed to be 5 minutes ago. And there was nothing for that night listed in City Hall for where that meeting was. And I raised the issue when it came up, and I haven't seen any improvement in that. And I hope that that's something that we can continue to focus on as a city. As long as the school department is in this building, the perception in the public, and an accurate perception, is that they are a part of our city government. And if you come here for something that's related to something that's happened with the school department, and it's not listed on that scrolling television screen for a member of the public to come in and figure out where they need to be, that's a failure of city government wherever it may lie. So I hope that's something that we can work on and resolve. If it's just a matter of communication, we need to get that taken care of. Because I think that it sends the wrong message to the community about the roles of these two departments, about the school department in our greater city government. And it's confusing to members of the public. And if we're not going to do that, then let's give the school department their own building and give the public a different address, and they'll know where to go for those things.
Okay.
We'll build them a nice fancy building with bonded money through a CIP.
Said the counselor who's leaving.
Yes, Councilor Titus.
Yeah, real quick, when it comes to D-1, the CIP, it's a little bit tricky, and I know this has been a function of most all municipalities, including ours, year after year, to have a CIP that is huge, the wish list, and then it's up to the manager and the department heads to whittle it down and come up with what they think they can sell to council. And I think it would be nice to be able to just come to council with what's needed, and the public would feel better, because I know that you see it in the paper all the time, whether it be our city or across the river, $14 million, $18 million, $20 million that they want to spend on a CIP, but we know that that gets whittled down to what's really going to happen. But the public sees, they just see the higher number and they think, wow, what's going on? So I'd like to see a CIP that's presented to us as the actual CIP of what we need this year, and not something that we have to whittle down from $14 million and prioritize to 8 or 3 or 6 or whatever it is, and year after year. So I'd like to see that. I know that that's the way it's always been done, but maybe there's a time to try it once this way. When it comes to communication, I did want to make one point. Councilor Lee made a good point about deliberations that can occur sometimes in emails. But one of the concerns that I've had as a councilor is many times we have a 15, 20, 30-minute workshop, and then luckily we don't vote on the same night on that issue, but that's all we have for deliberation. And then the next meeting, we vote on it. And we don't really have time for deliberation because it's in a very busy agenda. We can't spend time talking about it. It's either vote for it, yes or no. And that's really not enough time for many issues. A half an hour with 7 councilors, a mayor, and public comment to be able to make a decision. I mean, you're going to make it on your own, but is that what it's supposed to be? You go home to study this, decide in a vacuum, and then come to the council, but you've already made your decision. And years of being in the sidelines watching council, I go to a meeting and say, you know, these people have already made up their minds. They come to council and there's no way of changing anybody's mind because they've already made it up. So I don't know what the answer to that is, but part of the email communication you're talking about comes from the frustration of, well, yeah, but we can't talk about it until we go to council and we get 30 minutes. And that's not enough time. So I don't know what the answer is. I know the meetings are already long enough and there's too many of them already, but maybe certain issues are given more time than others, which would help councilors at least be able to air their, and convince maybe another councilor of their opinion, instead of having 3 minutes or 5 minutes and that's it. So that's my thoughts on those two. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions or comments on leading in public service?
I just had one more point that occurred to me under D-2 with communication. One of the things that I've found, I found a lot of things frustrating in my time as a city councilor, but one of the things that I've found recently frustrating as we've tried to move ahead with some strategic goals that require a lot of moving parts or a lot of public input or a lot of different pieces of government. There seems to be a bottleneck of communication between the council, staff, and our agencies, boards, and commissions. And I think that lies probably with each party, but I would be interested to see a way, if we are sold on the idea of this structure of government in which we have these agencies, boards, and commissions, committees doing work and engaging with the community and really working on behalf of the city to move things forward, it's very difficult to know, to make policy decisions or to be able to track that information effectively if there's not timely and effective reporting to the council. I know that by law, there's supposed to be regular reporting, and it just doesn't seem to happen. But in the context of communication within our government, I would like to see us engage with this question of how can we synthesize that information, and that, you know, the important work that's happening at the committee level, that our volunteers within the city are engaging in. I feel like it often happens in a vacuum, and we're not able to use that work as a council to move forward policy objectives, and just seeing a way to bring those structures back and orient them more toward the work that we're doing, and vice versa.
Okay. Very good. Any other questions or comments on this section?
I would have, thank you, couple. One of the things that it's I think very difficult for any manager to do is report to multiple bosses. And, you know, because there are 7 counselors, they may be coming from 7 different directions. And it's not very efficient in any management organization from what I can see. So I would just throw it on, I'm just going to throw it on the table that perhaps for the benefit of the city manager, that there would be a council president form of organization, so that the city manager could have a person to go to that has been voted in by the members of the council, a person that people are comfortable with, and not to take any power away from the individual. The city council president would have 1 vote like everybody else, but just somebody that would be a sounding board, and where the city manager could work directly with that person, and maybe the first stop in taking the temperature of the board. The other thing that I would like to just throw out on the table is, and Jill will strangle me when she hears this, but one of the things that we use at the Turnpike Authority is a 30-year financial plan. And we basically can tell you when the Hackett Road Bridge is going to be repaired. Maybe 2021 or maybe 2032 or whatever. But we have a plan that basically goes out 30 years. It changes 2 or 3 times a year. But the staff, the council, the taxpayers would see where, well, you know, what we're planning to do in what year. For example, if you need a new public safety building, that would be in that 30-year plan. At a certain point, it's going to happen either a year from now, or 5 years from now, or 20 years from now. You know, like we, for example, you can model it out, and we know that in 2031, we're going to have a toll increase. All right? And that's because that's what, you know, that's what the numbers indicate. So, you know, I just think that it would be very handy to have a long-term financial plan that the CIP can kind of sit under, and also tells the customers, tells the taxpayers, this is what we're thinking. And every year, go through the plan and revise it and change it and so on and so forth. So new fire trucks would be in there. New you know, police cruisers, et cetera. So not to belabor the point any more than I already have, but I find that to be a very very handy information tool, as well as management tool, as well as financial tool.
Okay. Any last questions or comments on this section, leading in public service? Customer relations, IT.
Just a quick comment, if I can. Knowing Councilor Stone as well as I do, I know that you have great respect for what Jill does as a finance director and the work that she does. That's a really interesting concept. I've never seen that done in municipal or county government. I think if we can work on trying to have more long-range planning and thinking, that's a good thing. And one of my hopes is after the election in November and we have the new council seated and a new mayor, this is going to help lay the foundation for the discussion that we'll have with that group. And then after that, we'll be looking at a strategic plan for the city. My recommendation to that body will be to develop a strategic plan for the city that does look further ahead with engagement in the community, with the neighborhoods, and invite people in and have a conversation and talk about where we want to be. And I would imagine that we will have some more long-term thinking on a lot of things, and including capital needs and so forth. So all of you have given us a lot to think about tonight. And I appreciate all the input and the comments, and I know we all do. Jill, did you want to say something?
Just a little. I see that with the Turnpike Authority because your assets are infrastructure, which, you know, they have the 30 to 50-year life. And we have those type of assets as well, but a lot of our assets are not, they have 10-year life or 15-year life. I believe that, you know, Public Works does have, Public Services has an inventory and a timeline for the roads and bridges and things like that. It hasn't probably been shared totally with the council, and that's something we could work on. I've thought for a while that we needed to fine-tune our CIP because I don't think it's comprehensive enough. I think that there's a lot of pieces missing, so I will definitely take your suggestions, and maybe we split it into two pieces, and one is the equipment portion and one is the infrastructure portion.
What you say is correct, you know, and we have 176 bridges that are rusting. Every one of them is rusting every day, so we've got to have a plan as to when we're going to replace those. So, and I'm sure you have a tremendous amount of infrastructure here that is in the same boat, that it'll need attention at some point down the road, and it'd be good if you can kind of define when that is going to be.
Okay. Any last comments on this section? Okay. Let me offer a last opportunity for department heads or the city manager to make a comment, and then, according to the agenda that we had planned, we're going to ask each city councilor and the mayor to offer a last comment. Anything you'd like, a brief comment, but anything you'd like on the proposed work plan, and then we're going to adjourn. Would any department heads like to make a last comment before we go to councilors? All of their comments are right in the plan, I guess. We worked on this early today, and it says it all. At least we did the best we could with the time that we had. Okay, very good. In terms of councilors, I don't have a specific order in mind. I'm just going to let you raise your hands, but we figured just to, like I said, hear briefly from each of you, a chance to make a last statement. I suppose in terms of protocol, then we'll turn second to last to the city manager, and we'll give the mayor the last word. The mayor opened the meeting. We'll let the mayor have the last word and close the meeting. Any councilor like to begin with a last comment?
I'll start. First, I want to thank staff for the hard work that went into this particular document, and also thank you for facilitating tonight's program, and our city manager for facilitating this. I think this is going to be a living document. Well, I hope it is. That may be and hopefully will be changed. I hope that nobody takes offense if somebody makes a comment about any part of this and changes are made. I hope changes are made, and that we can hopefully use this as a budget document as well, and then maybe also use it as a work plan. So it can be start out maybe as a budget document and become the work plan for the next year. So I'm very enthused about it, although I didn't agree with everything that's in here necessarily, but we really didn't have time to go over this. A lot of stuff here to go over all of it. But I hope we'll continue to communicate and talk about it as we go forward. So thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you, Councilor Titus. Someone else?
Well, golly gee. I'll just say, I want to say thank you to Peter, to our manager, for having this vision for this work session, along, when he came on board, something he started talking about. I do think it's worthwhile. I really appreciate the effort that went into it. I know we were just here for a few hours, or 2.5 hours, but I know it's obvious how much time went into preparing this document and how much work went in from our department heads. And of course, I know that they had to communicate with their staff in order to prepare this. So I'm very appreciative of that. And I think that this workshop tonight sort of highlights the type of partnership that needs to happen between counselors, whoever's sitting in those seats, and the management team that sits here at the helm. I know that we can really get enmeshed, or I should say immersed in the acrimony of the debate of the day from council meeting to council meeting. But as I look around at my fellow counselors, I know that we've agreed with one another when we did not expect to, and disagreed with one another when we did not expect to. And throughout all of that process, I've gained a lot of respect for what we do here in City Hall. And constituents have a tendency to tune in when it's important to them and then tune out. But I'm proud to say that it's important to all of us what happens day to day and what happens meeting to meeting. So I think that this really highlights all of that. So thank you, Mr. Manager, for giving the opportunity to all of us to express our concerns and our vision for the future.
What Councilor Pross said, to start, number one. Number two, I think on a week-to-week basis, and also day-to-day basis on social media, we hear of all the problems that the city of Auburn has. And that I go home some evenings after council meetings saying, we can't do anything right, and but I think by and large, we can't lose sight of the fact that we do a lot of things right in Auburn. And I think the vast majority of the citizens think that. And they're kind of the silent majority that are not going to be here on a week-to-week basis. The folks that have plenty to say about the city are valuable, because it's good to have the feedback, positive and negative. It's good, but you don't hear, for example, the citizens that I talk to are thrilled with the work that has been done on Park Avenue and on Hampshire Street. You don't hear about that. That's, cross that off, and that's not, hot enough to come up in a when you're on TV. And just keep the faith, keep doing the great job. It's been really enjoyable. I've learned a lot about city government in my 2 years here, and I just want to thank each and every one of you. Great team, and really want to do the best job possible. So I think this is a great document and a great session, and I appreciate the moderating of Craig Freshley. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to have a plan. Wait for the measurement of that plan, evaluate, and go back at it. Thank you.
I think I'm most appreciative of having the opportunity to have the department heads here for this conversation. Should I have the privilege to continue to serve the city of Auburn, I hope we continue these conversations. Counselors come and go, but the most institutional knowledge in the city is with the folks who are sitting in this room. Hopefully in those future sessions, there's more talking by you guys, because it would be great to hear some of the input that went into the plans that are here, and it's nice to hear from us, but it's also great to hear from you all. So I appreciate having the opportunity to have the department heads in the same room with us.
Thank you, Councilor Young, thank you. I want to thank the city manager and all his great helpers that he had to put this together. But I do want to tell you that in the very short time that we had to read this, digest it, think about it, it was too short. And we don't really have a chance to digest it to the point where we can ask you or think about what we should ask you on a lot of these points that you have here. And I do have a lot of different questions that I'd like to ask. But in some cases, I don't think we need to have the whole staff sit in here to ask these questions to you especially. I think a lot of them are directly for you and not to ask all of them. If you need their answer after, that's fine, but I don't think that that's the way I want to go about it. So thank you, though. It's a great session.
Okay, thank you.
It's a tough act to follow, Councilor Walker. I would just thank everyone for being here. It's really gratifying to sit around a table with, I don't know, the 25 or so of us and see, you know, a lot of disparate areas of responsibility and interest, but a shared sense of commitment to the city as a whole. It's nice to see, and it, you know, I lobbed a lot of, I hope, constructive criticism at the document today, but I am excited to see the city take a meaningful first stab at being the forward-looking organization that it can, should, and is going to be. So I'm excited to see this evolve and seeing this as a launching pad to you know, a better sense of cohesion and shared purpose among all of us here at the table. You know, and it's just, it's good to see everyone here contributing to that effort. So I would thank both Peter and Craig for pulling this together, and excited to see where we go from here.
Very good. I believe we've heard from all of the councilors. To you, sir.
Thank you, Craig, for the facilitation. You did a great job, as I knew you would. I want to thank the department heads again and your teams for providing the information to Denise. And Denise did a fantastic job in pulling the information together. She's really played a key role in terms of doing that. We would not have been able to provide you with the document that we did tonight without it. I apologize for the scheduling and the way that happened. Just worked out that way with Craig's schedule and everybody else's schedule that we ended up doing it the same day in terms of the department's workshop followed by this workshop. I think a good step would be to have a follow-up workshop with you at a council meeting or maybe a separate workshop altogether, just to follow up on some of the things that were talked about and add more meat to what we're doing in terms of this document. It is a privilege to be here and to be part of the city of Auburn, and I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you very much. Mr. Mayor.
This meeting is adjourned.
There you have it. The
Thank you,
meeting's adjourned.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.